This is gonna be my wrap-up video for the month of October. Lola's gonna help, obviously. Yeah, she's gonna help. She's gonna help a lot. No. We are gonna do a wrap-up for October reading. We did so much great reading in the month of October. Some weird reading, and also lots of DNFs. And I'm not going to mention the DNFs. I don't think any of them are DNFs forever. They were just DNFs for this time. I wasn't into sometimes what I thought I might be into. Lola, can you go lay down, please? So let me start by saying I'm in the middle of 2 books, which I will continue. One I intended to be in the middle of, and that is The Pickwick Papers. I'm on page 408 in this, my second reading of The Pickwick Papers, and that is just about 50%. I got here about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, and I've been listening to it this time, but also following along in this book, and I love it. I knew I loved The Pickwick Papers, but I love it. It's so much fun. It's like taking a long walk. The first time you take it, it feels like it's never going to end because you don't know all of the twists and turns and you don't know the landmarks along the way. And the second time you walk it, it feels a lot shorter. And the 10th time you walk it, it feels like nothing at all because you can anticipate how far or close you are to important moments or the end. And that's kind of how I feel about reading this for a second time. The first time I read it, it felt so long, even though I ended up loving it and even crying when it ended because it was over. This time, I know how much farther I have to go. I know how short and dear the events to come in the future are. And so it's reading a whole lot faster than I anticipated that it would, and it is just a delight. It is just a joy. I adore it so much. So I'm in the middle of that one, and then I am also in the middle of The Haunting of Bryn Wilder by Wendy Webb, and I will finish this one. Middle is generous. I think I'm on page 32, but I will finish this one first thing. Probably, tomorrow is Halloween. Tomorrow is October 31st. I will finish it like November 3rd or something. So that will be the first book that I finish in November, even though it's not on my TBR. It was on my TBR for October. So that is out of the way. Then I'm just going to mention and not wrap up the books that I read for Victober. If you want to know more about my thoughts on these, I have an entire vlog. My favorite book for Victober was Uncle Silas. I absolutely loved this. You can hear my thoughts on the video. My second favorite book was Miss Miles by Mary Taylor. My third favorite reading experience was a shock even to me. That is The Mayor of Casterbridge. Then The Moonstone, followed by the poems that I read by Gerard Manley Hopkins. I did not read any of the essays or letters or diary entries that are also included in here, but I would like to very soon. And I read 2 stories from The Grey Wolf. The 2 that I read were The Grey Wolf, which is the title story, and it was the first one, and the second story, The Cruel Painter. So I read those. They're both quite short. They're both fantastical. I would recommend George MacDonald in general, but I don't love short stories. So, okay. Hey Lola, can you stop, please? Stop. Thank you. All right, so those things out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the spooky books I read. Well, no, let's go ahead and talk about the required reading that I did for the month. First of all, I read The Taming of the Shrew. Technically, I did not read it, but watched it and listened to it. I watched the old Elizabeth Taylor version. I had never seen that before. I don't know how, but I never had. And then I also listened to it on a book that I got from my library, and I did not enjoy that particular audiobook, but The Taming of the Shrew is one of my favorite plays. I am rambling, and I'm going to cut all that out. Okay, so read Taming of the Shrew, loved it. And then also read, but didn't purchase, I listened to Hotel at Bertram's, or At Bertram's Hotel, by Agatha Christie, which was the 10th Miss Marple. I didn't buy it because I have been disliking the Miss Marples multiples in a row, and I was just like, I don't want to keep wasting my money on books that I'm never going to read again just so I have a complete set. And wouldn't you know it, didn't buy this one, just got it from the library and listened to it and loved it. Felt like it was a return to Miss Marple. Now I have to go buy it, and I will buy the last two as well, because now I don't know. Now I don't know if I'm going to love them or not. At Bertram's Hotel just pulled it all back for me, and I had the greatest reading experience. And maybe it's my own headspace, partly, but I do really think that some of those books in the middle there, Christie was phoning it in, or she herself had lost touch with who the Marple character was and the Marple brand, I guess. The Catholic School, which is like 9 books in one. This, I have mixed feelings about. I think that it is an incredibly important book. I think it was a very, very readable book. I think that it is more fact than fiction, even though it says it's a fictionalized account of a true story. It is about a true crime, but it's really about, it uses that true crime to explore the impact, the cause and effect relationship that the Catholic Church has with Italian society, that Italian custom has on young minds. It looks at the psychology behind pathologies, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like a tendency, like if someone is born, it's looking at nature versus nurture, really. I don't want to talk too blatantly about the crime. It is atrocious. It is true that some high school aged boys that all attended the same Catholic school and grew up together in the same town in Italy premeditated the kidnapping of 2 young girls and tortured and molested them, raped them. And the whole thing in the 1970s. And then attempted to murder them, but one survived, and she was able to get to the authorities and identify these boys. The boys they did face consequences, kind of. Some of them faced consequences. When one was finally released from prison decades later, he immediately killed 2 more women. And so this case changed the way that Italy and Italian law thought about and approached the crime of rape. This was one, as a person who watches a lot of true crime, this was one of the worst things I've ever read about. Yeah, it was really bad. So, trigger warnings galore. But what this case did, was caused Italy to reconsider their view of rape. In the past, it had always been considered not a crime against a person, not one person acting against another, but a crime against morality. So it was a social crime, and there was very little consequence. Most of the consequence came from not the law, but from your relationship to the church. And it was seen as a church issue, that it was a spiritual issue that needed to be attended to in that way. There was very little reason for people not to commit this crime again and again and again. And there was very little support for people who were on the receiving end. It was just seen as a moral issue. And the woman who survived had to fight for decades to see an official law change. So this book is using this case to question and highlight issues in Italian society, in Catholicism, in education, and also to try and explore the effects that family and coming of age and religion and education have on the individual, and how much of those influences are part of a pathological personality and how much would just happen anyway, no matter what those influences were or how they existed. I hope I'm making that. It's a very psychological, sociological book. And I am not sorry that I read it, but I am also, I guess I would recommend it, but I would also give this caveat that it is horrifying. And there is a film of it, an Italian movie that is on Netflix, and I tried to watch that and I could not do it. I would not recommend the movie. The movie is like an hour and a half long, and look at this book. This is helpful. The conversation around the crime, the character studies, the historical context, the religious context, the law context that is provided in this fictional account is helpful in dealing with that crime. The film tries to pack all of that in to an hour and a half and really just focuses on the crime and is just telling the story of the crime. And then in the end, it gives you like a little like, so-and-so survived and spent decades trying to make a change. No. Don't watch the film. It's bad. I mean, it's not badly done. It's bad for your heart. The book, while very, very difficult to read, I think is important. And I can't imagine how impactful it must have been in the original Italian and when it went out in Italy. I'm sure that this just caused waves, and I would like to know more about the reception of the book in Italy. I haven't looked into that yet, but I will. So, one of the hardest things I've ever read. Really, really well done, I think. Would recommend it, but know that it's not for the faint of heart. Not sorry I read it. Sorry that it has to exist. Okay, now let's go through the supposedly dark reads that I read for Halloween, which were, most of them, with the exception of one, were nothing in comparison to the Catholic school. Okay, so I read The Wren Hunt by Mary Watson, and this was quite fun. Very heavily influenced by Celtic mythology. You just get dropped right into the action. It is YA. It reads a little bit older than YA, I say. YA, I say. It did not have that kind of, like, I oftentimes am turned off in YA by the fact that it is, like, every character is just the embodiment of emotion. So, and I get why YA authors do that, and I get why that sort of story is marketed to YA, but it also often means that we lack a fully rounded character, we lack character development, because it's just, every character is just the embodiment from one moment to another of just some intense emotion. Okay, teens feel intense emotion. Teens also can handle character development. I'm not going to say there's a ton of character development in this, because part of the story is about somewhat hidden identity, clouded identity. And so I think that we are purposefully kept at arm's length from most of the characters. But I think that it felt, like I just said, purposeful. And so I think that in that way, it felt less YA to me. I don't have anything against YA. I just struggle with that aspect of YA. I think that it was a great book. I do have the second one, which is a companion, not a sequel. It's very action oriented, and that's not really my kind of book most of the time. So I think that I will happily read the sequel or the companion, but wait until October and not feel deprived at all. It's about, do I want to go into what they're about? Basically, it's about this kind of alternate contemporary world where people still hunt people. That's what I'll say. That's all I will say. Yeah, I think it'd be best to go into it without knowing too much. I picked up on a whim Garlic the Vampire, which is a graphic novel, which is so sweet. Here is a sample of what that looks like, what the art looks like. I actually absolutely loved this, and I realized there is at least one more, and I will pick that up for next Halloween. Garlic the Vampire is all about this little vampire girl who has a hard time doing the things she needs to do just to be alive. Don't we all? She's late for things. She's not reliable. She wants to be, but she's just a little bit scattered. She tries her hardest and things just don't seem to work out. And then a vampire moves into the area, and she, being Garlic, has to go confront him. And it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story, and I absolutely would highly recommend it. It's a very quick read, but it's just so feel good and fun. And yeah, I would totally recommend it. I read The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. I actually listened to this on audio when I realized that Will Wheaton is the one who narrates it, and Will Wheaton was the perfect narrator for this. This is just ridiculously fun. This is maybe one of my favorite books of the year, which is wild to me. It is not beautifully written. It's pretty sparse and straightforward. It's a little short sci-fi book about this guy who gets laid off from his job, and then COVID happens, and during COVID, he has to deliver food. He has to be a food delivery person for like something like DoorDash or Uber Eats or something. And that puts him in contact with somebody who gets him in contact with somebody who gets him this kind of top secret, well-paying job where he's going to have to go to Greenland. The only thing is to help preserve these animals. The only thing is that it's not the Greenland we know. It's a alternate universe Greenland in which there are dinosaurs and all sorts of things. And he has to preserve this particular kind of animal called a kaiju. And the whole thing is super fun. It's just super fun and totally wild. And the thing that I think that I loved about it so much is that as a person who has multiple times boarded an airplane and in a place that I know and landed in a place that I don't speak the language, have never been, have no friends there yet, have no established like understanding beyond reading or watching a video about a culture or a place, and lived there and worked there and interacted with life there. It felt, this person getting on this plane and then getting off in this unknown land, it felt a lot like that to me. It felt like my experience, of course on steroids, but it felt like my personal experience with moving overseas multiple times to live and work for extended periods, for years at a time. It just felt very genuine in that way. And so as he's having these experiences, of course, they're not the same as the experiences that I have had, but I could feel his frustrations, his culture shock, his confusion, and I could anticipate where he was going to screw up because it was very genuine. It was very real. And I really loved it. It's funny. It's heartfelt. It is social commentary, and I would highly suggest you listen to Will Wheaton. It was just a joy. It was just a joy. I really, really loved it. I will leave it there, but I loved it. I read The Attic Child by Lola J, and this was my least favorite read of the year, probably. It is just so painful. I read so many painful books this month, and it's really well written. The pacing is great. The character development is great. The story is fine. It was just too hard to read over half of it. Actually, it was just too hard to read the whole thing because they're both going to end up in this attic. It's a dual timeline with both children ending up in their own timelines in the attic at some point. And so you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And it takes a really long time for the story to get to the point where things are terrible for them both. And so it's like anxiety producing. So I felt really anxious for over half the book. And then I felt really devastated for like a quarter of the book, and then the last quarter is supposed to lift you up, and it just wasn't enough for me. I've heard a lot of people really loving this book, so if you're interested in it, you should pick it up. But for me, it was not a good read. I really, really struggled with it, and I will say that it's a testament to how well it's written that I didn't DNF it. I had to know. I couldn't leave them. At any point, I couldn't leave either of these people where they were in my imagination. I had to get to the end of the book. And the end of the book is satisfying in that I can let it go, which is good. But I did not like that. I did not like that experience at all. That is not what I go to reading for, and it will make me hesitant to pick up anything else by this author, even though I think they are a good author. Like, I think they are a skilled author. Okay, I read The Nesting by C.J. Cook, and this had some really great, fun, creepy moments that were genuinely like they would have been jump scares if they were in a movie. The whole premise of a woman stealing another woman's identity, of going into the deep, dark Nordic woods, I enjoyed it, and I also just struggled with it. The big reveal felt like a letdown to me. The environmental aspect of it felt contrived. It made big promises in the first 2/3 of the book with the way that the story was unfolding and being told, the vibe that was being created. I really fell in love with and was rooting for the nanny character and the two children that she's taking care of. And in a way, C.J. Cook really successfully created, including me into it, the reader into it, this a little nest of, of me and the nanny and these two children against the world and ghosts and things. And then the last third of the book was unbelievable or poorly conceived, or it just lost me. It lost me. So I don't know. I might pick up another C.J. Cook in the future, but at the moment, I don't think I will. If I want to read a book that does the same thing for me, I'll probably just pick up a Ruth Ware, who I know I love. It's C.J. Cook and Ruth Ware, I feel, are trying to do very similar things, but Ruth Ware is better at it, in my humble opinion. I read Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match by Sally Thorne. Sally Thorne wrote one of my favorite books of last year or the year before. Of course, we all know Sally Thorne, The Hating Game, etc. But I don't really like The Hating Game all that much. And the one that's by her, I'm looking at my shelf, Second First Impressions, is one of my favorite books of all time. I love that book so much. I love the character development. I love the sweetness of it. I love the storyline. I just really, really love that book. And it's her least popular book. Everybody's like, that one was nothing. I was hopeful about this one. I pre-ordered it because it was about Frankenstein's sister making her own monster who actually is somebody who's like her perfect match. It was just, and this sounds silly because it's about a woman who makes her boyfriend, but it was just ridiculous. Most of it is, the romance aspect of it is uncomfortable most of the time. Maybe she meant for it to be that way, but it was not cool for me. The majority of the book is this monster that she's created trying to figure out his past, who he really was. She's trying to ask questions about like where does identity and personality and memory reside within the human form, but it's a romance book. I don't know. It just didn't do it for me. The whole thing felt oddly slow, oddly campy, and uncomfortable. Yeah, it was not my favorite. That doesn't mean I would never try to read it again. I might try to read it again knowing what it is. I may have had higher expectations than were fair. And I didn't hate it. I was just disappointed by it. So I will put it on the shelf, and then in a year or 2 or 3, I'll give it another try, knowing what it is, and try and accept it for what it is and see how I feel about it at that point. But it was no second first impressions. I'll say that. I read The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. This was fun YA told, well, it might be adult, but it's told through the voice of a teen who, it's Edinburgh. It's kind of a dystopian sort of future. Something bad has happened and everything's kind of darker and dirtier and grosser than it is now in our reality. And there's a girl whose family business has been kind of like an exorcist, kind of, but maybe more like a paranormal investigator as well, maybe like a ghost psychologist. Anyway, she's young and this is her job, but there's this mystery happening with these girls that keep disappearing from Edinburgh, and she's gotten involved in that. There's a lot going on in a book that's so short. I would pick up the second book, which is out, but I will pick up the second book at some point in the hope that the story will get me more now that I understand the book. I feel like a lot of The Library of the Dead was trying to catch the reader up with what the author's already imagined fully. And I'm not a big fan of that kind of world building. I want the world building to feel comfortable. And this felt, because there's so much going on and because it is a familiar thing, Edinburgh, but it's not that familiar place that we know, it felt oddly rushed and slow at the same time. The story felt slow, the mystery felt slow, the information coming at me felt fast, and I just didn't love it. Yeah, it was okay. It was fine. Then I also read The Wicked Deep, which is another YA. I think this was the most enjoyable YA that I read this month. This one takes place in the Pacific Northwest. It is about a town, an island, where in the past some sisters had been killed for being, they'd been accused of being witches, and they were killed for that, and now they haunt the town. Every year they inhabit the bodies of several girls in the town and kill boys, drown them. And so it's an interesting premise. It's a creepy premise. It's well done. Very angsty YA-ish. Lots of like YA romance going on. The only thing about it is that I knew what was going on. So there's a mystery throughout, and I sensed it from the get-go, and that didn't ruin the story for me, but it altered the way that the lens through which it just took some of the magic away from the story. The story, I think, Earnshaw, what's her name? Shay Earnshaw, I think is a great storyteller, is a great writer. I just had a hunch. I don't know that she gives away too much. I just had a hunch, and my hunch turned out to be correct. But I felt so strongly about my hunch throughout the whole reading that I think it took some of the magic away for me. There's a sequel, but like with the Wren Hunt, it's not a sequel, it's a companion, which I will pick up as well and probably read next October. So even though I'm not like gushing about The Wicked Deep or The Library of the Dead or The Wren Hunt, I'm not gushing about these books, but I did enjoy them. I think, though, that in comparison, reading them alongside the Victorian novels that I was reading maybe did them a bit of a disservice because they just aren't as rich as Victorian literature because they're YA contemporary romance thrillers. So, of course, they're not as rich. They felt two-dimensional to me reading them in between these complex stories that I was reading for Victober. The last book I'm going to talk about is Let's Kill Uncle by Rohan O'Grady. This is one of the darkest books I have ever read. Ever read. This is about a boy who goes to an island, an orphan boy who goes to an island and makes friends with a little girl who's spending her summer there as well. They wreak havoc on the island, Their havoc is a cry for help, and no one will listen to them. The boy's uncle is trying to kill them. He's trying to kill them. There's no misunderstanding there. The boy's uncle is trying to kill these two children. And they feel that they try to get adult help, and none of the adults will take them seriously. Partly because they're children, partly because it's such an unbelievable premise, and partly because they've done some childish havoc wreaking. They've done some not childish havoc wreaking too. There's some animal stuff that happens in here. I struggled sometimes with what was going on in this book to the children and to animals at the hands of children, at the hands of others. But I think that it was meant to be there because they're two innocent things. The children are innocent and the animals are innocent. There's a wildcat in here who we sometimes get the perspective of. Sometimes the story switches to the wildcat's perspective. And this wildcat is mistreated because it's a wildcat, not a human being, and therefore not valued, just like the children are mistreated because they're children and not adults, and therefore not valued. So there's important duality going on in this story, but it's still hard to read about. And the uncle is truly trying to kill these children, and nobody will help them. So they decide that the only recourse they have is to kill him first. And that's what a lot of the story is about. Them premeditating, in order to save themselves, killing this man who's trying to kill them. And I will leave it at that in case you want to read the book. There's more to it. This is a deceptively simple story told in an incredibly complex manner. I would like to read it again at some point because I know that it is a treasure trove for literary analysis. And it is just disturbing. It is so disturbing. And yet at the same time, warm. I've never read anything quite like it. And I would like to try to read something else by this author. Think like Shirley Jackson meets Marquis de Sade. I don't know. That's not perfect. That's not a perfect pairing. But yeah. Hi, Lola. Hi. You being such a good girl. Yeah. Anyway, that was the last book that I finished for October, and it was a doozy. I think, though, I gave this 5 stars. I think that I loved this, but also incredibly, incredibly disturbing and so frustrating that no one will listen to these children at all. It's like a dream. It's reading this book is like being in a nightmare. That's what I will say. Anyway, so much fun reading all these incredibly dark, terrifying books. Don't have a whole lot of positives to say, I guess, but my feeling about the reading month was very positive. I feel like I had a lot more fun this month and a lot more successes, a lot more higher rated books than last month. But the reading material was quite dark. It was quite dark. And that might be why I loved reading Ms. Miles so much, because if you watch my Victober vlog, you'll know that I hugged it at the end and it felt so warm and gentle and cozy and welcoming, because it was the least, and also Garlic the Vampire, those two. Oh, and also the Kaiju Preservation Society, those 3 were like my shining lights in the darkness for these reads. These were dark days, my friends. And I loved it. And also, wow, I'm really looking forward to my November TBR. And also, I have been pulling just feel good, cozy, not dark, not terrifying, not psychologically twisting books for December. So, yeah, I think this was a great reading month. I think this was a dark reading month, what's October for, really? Victober was a huge success. Bean's Big Book Bash was a success, even though super, super dark. Met Miss Marple again, loved it, loved her again, and I guess that's it. I have already picked up, full disclosure, my first read for my November TBR, which is Secrets of the Sprickar, and I am absolutely loving it. It feels so nourishing to read something nonfiction and uplifting. I need that nourishment deep in my soul. I have been watching scary movies or TV shows every day for the last 2 months. And I'm now working on a viewing, a VBR, a viewing, a to be viewed, no, a TBV, to be viewed, a TBV of just really wholesome, family-oriented, uplifting, happy, familiar films and TV shows to counteract the darkness that I have brought into my life with September and October. So it felt good at the time, and now let the light shine. What have you read and loved in the month of October? Was your reading as dark as mine? Have you read any of these? Do you disagree? Did you just love The Attic Child and I am just so off base? Have you read The Catholic School? Do you think you might read Let's Kill Uncle? I would recommend it. I would. It's not for the faint of heart, but I would recommend it. let's go read. Let's just go read. I'll see you later. Thanks for watching.